It's funny, despite living with James for so many years, I've never.
All right. Yes, we are live. All right. So, Uncle, thank you for joining me on the third episode of the Significantly Scientific podcast.
My pleasure.
Do you like the name of the podcast?
It seems a bit generic.
Yeah, it is, yeah. But I mean, it's so generic the way people use significantly in their scientific papers, right?
Well, one would hope not. Significant should have a significant meaning. The
Right.
problem is that I feel like the media probably misconstrues that more than science.
Yeah, you're right.
Significant has a statistical meaning
It's true.
as opposed to just a qualitative meaning.
It's true. It was more just a play on words. But I'm glad to have the feedback.
I mean, ultimately, a name is just a name.
Yeah.
It's what you do with the show that will make it mean something.
Yeah. And today on the show, we're going to hopefully do something that means something. Because I want to ask you kind of, I guess, how you got into science and what science means to you, I guess. So could you maybe give an example or, talk about a time in childhood that you thought, wow, the science is interesting?
Okay, so the best episode from my childhood would be between 7th and 8th grade. I absolutely knew I was going to be a geneticist. Now, for context, I am not a geneticist. I am now a physicist.
Yeah.
So, now that you know the ending, here's how the story goes. So, I wanted to study genetics, but obviously in 7th grade, they don't really teach you much genetics in middle school.
Yeah, what was your even conception of genetics then?
I had a brief exposure to it in like basic Mendelian crosses, and that's about as far as we got into it, but I wanted to know a lot more. So first step was make mom buy books on genetics, and she found these two like intro books, one of which went like beyond Mendelian genetics into the nature of DNA and like Drosophila experiments and heredity and things like this. The other one, which was a lot denser and a bit more like college level, which I had some trouble getting through, but it was still an interesting read. Like even at this time, my parents were exposing me to books that were way above my level.
Oh, right.
I remember I also had a copy of The Universe in a Nutshell. That was given to me on my 13th birthday.
Oh, wow.
Now my first read through, all I thought was, "Ooh, these are pretty pictures. I don't understand the text at all, but these are pretty pictures." And then in high school, I started to like come back and figure out, "Oh, okay, this is what this actually is." But for the genetics, those two books were nice, but that wasn't really enough. And luckily, at the time, my eldest cousin, who's almost exactly 10 years older than me, so he was just starting medical school. So they were learning all of this stuff as well because it's part of their curriculum. So I was just hounding him when I would come see him in the summers, what he'd be learning about genetics.
Interesting.
And this ultimately is what caused problems later down the line, because my interest in genetics caused parts of my family to assume that I would become a doctor, just like my eldest cousin.
Oh, I see.
And so they tried to pressure me into medicine, but ever since I can remember, I wanted to do science. And so I can't, the reason I explained this episode is because I can't think of a time where I didn't want to do science, and so I don't know when that original impetus came from.
Yeah. I mean, do you think, so it sounds like maybe you were kind of always naturally inclined to be a scientist. Do you think that's true?
I would say so.
Yeah.
I've always been naturally curious.
Yeah.
And trying to take things apart and put them back together.
Right.
I guess this also helps that I just finished watching a documentary on Netflix about Legos, which really reminded me of how much Legos were important to me in terms of exercising my creativity and just having fun with something.
Right. Did you have a favorite Lego thing that you made?
Lego thing that I made.
I remember I made Millennium Falcon, but it wasn't a big one. It wasn't like the super expensive ones.
Yeah. Lego, I don't know, because I have a lot of models from when I was younger, and
like Lego models.
yeah, that I built myself. And the good thing is that I've kept them all. I've made my mother keep them in the attic so no one can break them, or so that they don't break them down and ship them off to the youngest child in the family.
Right.
More recently, I've been using K'NEX a lot more.
What's K'NEX?
So K'NEX is I wouldn't say it's a rip-off of Lego. It's a bit different. So Lego is based around bricks, right? You stack up bricks, you build stuff. K'NEX is built around spokes and hubs. So you have hubs that can have between 1 to 8 connections.
Yeah.
And so when you have an 8 connection piece, it has up, down, left, right, and then diagonals.
Right.
And so you have hubs, and then you have sticks that have various lengths. And the system around K'NEX is that every progressively higher piece is root 2 longer than the other one. So if you made a right angle out of 2 pieces, the diagonal would be the length of the next big piece. Okay. And this builds up to a certain level.
Oh, interesting.
So I use it a bit growing up. So this is actually there's 2 sides. Growing up, Legos was the thing, but I had K'NEX. Now, K'NEX is the thing. Currently, I still play with K'NEX and build stuff with it. I have the kit with me here.
Wow.
I brought it from home because every so often I like to build with it and just exercise my creativity in some way. And most recently I use it to build costume stuff. So in that sense, there are 2 things that I built that were the grandest things ever. The first was when I was in Cambridge, we had a costume party and I built full-size wings.
Oh.
Because I had just seen Winter Soldier.
Oh, no, I don't know.
Captain America, the Winter Soldier?
No, I don't know, sorry.
Okay, so there's a character in there whose name is Falcon, who has these full-size wings that pop out of his backpack.
Okay.
So I made that backpack with full wings that I could unfurl out of K'NEX. It took almost every piece I had.
So mechanically it actually worked? Mm-hmm. Whoa, that's impressive.
Yeah, I have pictures I can show you later of that. The second one, which is probably the most fun in terms of building process, was my most recent one. Last Halloween, we had a Halloween party, and I came as the Witch King of Angmar from Lord of the Rings. So the crown, actually, I had already built before.
Oh, okay.
But the Morning Star took a lot of work because it had separate links. So you could actually swing it around, and it wouldn't fall apart. Also quite dangerous, but... This is why you this is why you use K'NEX for when you're an adult.
I see. Yeah. Lego when you're a kid, K'NEX when you're an adult.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, that sounds like a pretty common theme, right? When I talk to other science nerds and so on, we're all kind of tinkering, at least, with something. In your case, it was Legos and, sorry, what's the name? K'NEX?
K'NEX. It's like K''NEX.
Okay.
I don't know what it's short for. But I mean, the other side of it, apart from just the creativity thing, was curiosity.
Yeah.
And I would go through tons of books all the time, trying to learn as much as I can.
Right.
I still have a lot of those books at home just in case. And I collected more books, even though I kind of outgrown that level of material, just because it's nice, convenient reference. And there was this magazine we had, Kids Discover, where every month you get a new issue, and it's just about a topic. And it goes into it as much depth as a kid can understand, but it covers it really well. So, so you have things like weather,
genetics.
Genetics, I don't think I got one, but there would be one about tigers. There'd be one about blood. There'd be one about cancer. Things like this, sort of a bit more focus than you would expect out of a kids magazine.
So was it one of those that sort of steered you towards, because you're in physics now, basically, right? So how did we get from genetics to physics?
So that mostly changed in the end of 8th grade.
Oh, okay.
So 7th grade and beginning of 8th grade, I was mostly on genetics. Then we get to 8th grade where up till, so I 8th grade is where I had probably the most influential science teacher in grade school.
So how old are you in grade school? What age is that?
So the 8th grade would be 14.
Okay, yeah.
So this teacher was different from most other teachers because he didn't teach didactically. He taught, and then he challenged us to think very critically about what we had learned. It was in his class I learned what a curve was.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
a bell curve for grading. That's
Right.
how hard his tests were.
Oh,
that he had to curve it. I hadn't had to deal with a curve until college after that.
Really?
But he was curving our tests because they were that hard.
Wow.
But he also challenged us a lot from an engineering point of view. So he had a couple of challenges throughout the year that people would work on for credit. Now, an important context for my grade schooling, I grew up in the U.S., but I had a lot of Asian immigrant families, including my own family,
Right.
that were in the area, and all of us were extremely competitive.
Right.
So we were all pushing each other to do really well. And for the most part, they were doing better than me on tests. Tests are kind of my weak point.
Right.
But the engineering challenges were my strong suit.
Right. Right.
And that's where I kind of realized, hey, I think I have a knack for this. I should probably stick to this. The best part being the second of the challenges was a boat race.
Oh.
And so we had to build a boat that would go across a trough and race against each other.
Yeah.
And so the first prototype we built was we took pieces of wood, cut them to shape, and kind of hot glue them together.
Okay.
This is when we realized hot glue dissolves in water. And so we put our boat together and it just slowly melts apart. And so, and then in one of these kids' discoveries, I read about a development that a propeller can pull more water when it's on the front of the boat than the back. The reason most people don't do it is bad for aerodynamics, or hydrodynamics.
Yeah.
But because the boat itself will cause turbulence in the water,
Yeah.
if you put the propeller in the front, it will be able to grip in the water when it's more laminar and give you a bit more drag. Or sorry, a bit more thrust,
Right,
basically. And so we tried that. We took just a water bottle because we had nothing else to use now. We lost our hull.
All right.
Poked a hole, put the propeller in the front, and it was faster than everything else.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite impressive. So this was, I suppose, an example of sometimes the least engineered thing is the best, right?
Yeah. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best.
Yeah. But it was this experience, you say, that sort of brought you closer to something like physics compared to what you previously were interested in as a child. And it was genetics.
Yeah, genetics was the most intellectually curious or interesting. But I guess engineering and physics is where I started to feel more at home and where I felt more comfortable. It was just a matter of me realizing, okay, how do I explain this to higher education people, and how do I use this to inform where I should go next?
Right. Yeah. And so obviously, when you're doing some sort of engineering, it's kind of very hands-on. And you talked about your rationale in this instance for putting the propeller at the front, but is what made you not want to become, say, an engineer then?
So that was more something that happened in college. Two choices were made, or maybe coincidences. The first was when I applied to the school I ended up going to for undergrad, UC Berkeley. I forgot they had an engineering school that was separate from the main school. So I applied to physics thinking, where are all the engineering majors? And then later, I felt we all get our acceptances, and my friend's I got into mechanical engineering. I was like, where was that? In the College of Engineering, which is separate from the College of Letters and Sciences, which you have to apply to separately. And I was like, well, I guess I'm doing physics. And later in college, I thought, okay, maybe I'll switch into the College of Engineering, because you could transfer between colleges.
Right.
And I try to get complete the classes, and I'm ready to transfer, and I think, wait, why do I want to do this? I'm learning everything I need to now.
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of engineering I really want to do. If I study physics, I can probably figure out my way into any engineering.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where I've been since.
Okay.
It also happened that during that time, I became involved in an engineering competition involving building solar vehicles.
Right.
If you're familiar with it, the World Solar Challenge in Australia is one of the biggest of these type.
Yeah.
So I was part of a team that sent a car in 2011.
Right.
And it was through that I learned just about everything I know about real engineering from building that car from the ground up.
Wow. And so you built it and then obviously flew it over to Australia and
Shipped it the slow way.
Okay, right.
6 weeks on a boat.
Oh, did anything break?
Some things, but nothing that couldn't be repaired.
And how many were in the team?
Well, the team as a whole was about 40 people, but there were about 20, 25 of us that went to Australia.
Oh, wow.
Because in order to go, we had to withdraw from the university for a semester.
Oh.
So not everyone could afford to take that time off.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, I mean, you didn't spend the whole semester in Australia, right? But you spent some that time.
I spent a whole month there.
Oh, right.
And then I had to come straight back.
Yeah,
Other people stayed longer to do vacations, but I had to fly straight back to attend a conference.
Yeah. That's a shame. Of course, I'm from Australia, so there's many good things to see. But you went from Darwin, which is at the very top, down to Adelaide.
Yep.
Through Alice Springs.
Yes. Yeah. I got to see Sydney.
Really?
I came a week early to visit my aunt in Sydney, so I got to see that area a bit.
Sydney's nice.
And we actually started in Adelaide because our car came into Melbourne.
Oh. Okay.
And so we picked up the car there, went to Adelaide, drove up the Stewart Highway to Darwin for the beginning of the race, and then raced back down.
Right, but you didn't drive in your solar car up to Darwin, right?
No, we just towed it. Yeah.
Yeah, I see. And so I mean, what was that experience like? It would have been kind of amazing, and there was 20 of you. Mm-hmm. So did you get to drive it, or was there like a?
So I cannot drive the solar car.
Oh.
I am too big. Oh, I was able to drive it once. Like when we're in our workshop from one area to the other. I drove it for a short while, but it required me to tie my shoelaces to the pedal because my legs were so long that they went past the pedals. So it's not comfortable for me. Gotcha. We had our like smallest, lightest people drive it.
I see.
But driving a solar car is not as simple as just pull off of the road and drive on the road. You usually need a convoy around the car to protect it from traffic, especially in Australia when you have road trains.
Yeah. Do you want to explain what a road train is?
Yes, for all the non-Australian viewers, a road train is what some people would call a lorry, some people would call a truck, but instead of just one trailer, it tends to have 2 or 3 or 4 trailers attached to it. And we usually see these on the Stewart Highway, which goes through the middle of the Outback. There's one road. No one's stopping for anything. So they just pedal to the metal, go straight through the Outback. You do not want to get in their way.
No, you don't. So I assume like they try to overtake you while you're in the solar car.
Yes. So typically you would have your solar car in the center, and you would have buffer on either side. We call this lead and chase vehicles. So lead vehicle is just in the front to make sure that no one can gets rear-ended by the solar vehicle. Chase vehicle is more important, so they follow from behind. They give instructions to the driver, and they receive telemetry from the car. So we had our car putting out continually data about how the solar cells are doing, how the batteries are doing, how the motor is doing, and all that data is fed back to our laptop in the car that we can then keep a real-time monitor of. And based on that, we inform the driver, hey, go a bit slower, you're burning too much battery, or go a bit faster, you're generating more power.
I see.
So that's your main convoy. To protect it further, you have scout vehicles that go ahead about 1 kilometer or so, checking for any road hazards, which is typically where I was. So I was typically in the scout vehicle going ahead. One such episode was we were driving down the road and we see this car coming and says, warning, wide load coming. We're like, okay, sure, it's a wide load. It couldn't be that bad. And then a bit later, we see this truck carrying half of a house
that happens
coming down the road. And so I get on the radio and I'm like, guys, there is half a house coming down the road. And so we all pull off, let the house pass, and we keep going. And about an hour later, guys, the other half is coming now.
Great.
So that's Scout. And then behind you'll have the trailer and RV. Trailer is important because if the car ever breaks down, you need to tow it somewhere. You need a truck. RV is not really required, but we had an RV run by our team lead's parents. They decided to follow along with us, and they were actually really helpful because while we were busy driving, they were going to whatever town we could find and picking up groceries. So that in the evening, while we're fixing up the car, they would make dinner.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
That's really good. And how many days was that?
So the race itself is 7 days.
Ah, right. And it's just as far as you can get, or they assume you're going to get to Adelaide?
No, it's as far as you can get. Most out of 30 teams, 12 were able to finish the race, and the rest of us were rated on how far we got by the end of 7 days. So we did not finish. We made it 1,600 kilometers out of 3,000.
Oh wow! Okay, so just over halfway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is all right with us. I mean, we didn't really know what to expect. The Outback is a very, very harrowing environment, so to do even that well was pretty impressive.
Right, yeah.
I think also the most impressive thing about all of that was, so I mentioned we shipped the car. It took 6 weeks for the car to go by boat from Oakland Port to Melbourne. During that time, we redesigned all of the electronic control systems in the car.
Whoa.
We printed new circuit boards, built them, tested them on a table, brought that with us to Australia, put it in the car, and it worked better.
Oh wow!
Without having the car to test on, we just built a better system while we were waiting.
That's impressive.
And that made all the difference.
Yeah, really. So maybe without that, you would have not got as far as you did.
Definitely not.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's quite a experience. I wouldn't say many people can say that they've built or been involved in racing a solo car across Australia.
Yeah.
Must have been pretty surreal.
Definitely was. I don't remember as much of it as it was like from all the sleepless nights, but it was a lot of fun.
There was like some stress about like fixing things, or?
Yeah, I mean, like I know one night we were up late because we had to do surgery in the battery box. We built the battery pack ourselves from the same sort of cells that Tesla uses in its vehicles, 18650 cells, the same ones you'll see in old laptops as well. Same basic idea. We took a bunch of those cells and assembled our own battery pack.
Oh, okay.
And one of our modules was acting weird, so we had to open up the battery pack, which was A, high voltage, and B, high current. And with these thick, like high voltage protection gloves, like slowly take apart a single pack and remove it.
Right.
And this is like at 10 p.m.
Yeah.
Sun's already down.
Oh man, yeah. And this was in the summer, I take it.
This was October, so springtime I guess. You would know better than me.
Yeah, it's springtime. Yeah. Actually, something that always gets me is when Americans say fall. I have no idea when fall is, because for one thing, I have to translate that to being autumn, and then for another thing, I have to figure out which hemisphere they're talking about, and then so I have to translate it into like, oh, okay, I guess that's like, so fall would be October, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah, and because right after the race, when I go back, I go straight to a conference in Lansing, Michigan. So I go from about 27 Celsius to about 0.
Oh. Wow.
In 48 hours.
Oh man, yeah. It snows in Michigan.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Because again, it's winter based almost there.
Yeah. It doesn't really snow in Australia though, I've got to say. Which I really like. I don't like.
Are there like significant seasons? Like, do you have?
Yeah, I mean, there's the hot season and there's like.
But are there seasonal trees?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, you get like you get like the pretty kind of autumn leaves and stuff like that. But I mean, yeah, you don't. I mean, there are evergreens, but I mean, actually, now that I think about it, a lot of our native plants are evergreens. But.
Which makes sense, given how you described your seasons.
Yeah. I mean, there's really just like a really hot one, mostly dry, except like the northern parts, it's a bit more humid. And then there's just like, kind of mild dry. Yeah, never snow. I mean, there are snowing. There are like, if you go up some mountains, there's snow. But yeah, I think the skiing season in Australia is like on the order of weeks. So, don't, I mean, come if you want to ski, but it's going to be such a short time. So, we're now in Japan. We're not in the northern part of Japan at all. We're in the most southern part.
Where there is no snow season. Where there's no skiing season.
Yeah. So, what brought you here then?
So that's a bit of a interesting tale, and one that I've had to tell a lot.
Okay.
But the gist of it is, I guess, kind of following from where I was going to do physics. Shortly after, I go to a summer program in 10th grade, where I meet a professor at UC Santa Cruz, Dave Dorfin. And he was at the time working in particle physics, but he was really like more of an expert on analog electronics.
Okay.
And the sort of challenges and the sort of things that he exposed me to pushed me more than anyone ever had in terms of science. And since then, he's been my mentor in like most major decisions I've made in terms of my physics career.
Oh wow! So you're still in touch with him? Wow.
So
all the way from 10th grade.
So third year of college. At this point, he calls me up in the middle, in the middle of nowhere, just saying, "Hey, I'm going to Okinawa to set up a graduate university with my brother.
Whoa.
You should come. It'll be fun."
Uh-huh.
So to provide some context, so Dave was a professor at UC Santa Cruz. His brother, younger brother, Jonathan Dorfin, used to be at the time was the director of SLAC. SLAC is the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center.
Okay.
However, you can't call it that anymore because now it's the SLAC National Accelerator Lab.
Oh, okay.
Because in the national lab system, every national lab ends with the word lab, except for SLAC.
Okay.
So they had to change that. So now it's the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center National Accelerator Lab. But I digress. So Jonathan was director of SLAC, and he was leaving SLAC to become the president of this new university called the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, or OIST. So Jonathan was coming to be president. Dave was coming to help him set up the physics side of things.
Right.
OIST had existed before this, but they had mostly focused on life science and neuroscience research. And now Jonathan was going to bring in the physics side. So again, I was in my third year, so I didn't have time. I wasn't applying that year. One of my friends who knew Dave through the same program, he went to intern that summer, whereas I went to SLAC to intern. But then the next year I apply.
Yeah.
We both go for interviews.
Yeah.
And before we even get to the interviews, like Dave pulls us aside and he's like, "Don't worry, you guys are in. Just have fun with the interviews."
I see.
At the time, I can understand why he did it. Like, it seems like it's because Dave was in charge of admissions committee. It seems like he's really abusing the system to get me to come. But at the same time, he turns to my friend and says, "You shouldn't come here. You should go to Stanford because what you want to do can't be done here."
Right.
OIST is still very small. It can only appeal to so many kinds of people, and it may not be the right place for you.
Yeah.
And even though he was working here, he was openly admitting that. He's always been very brutally honest like that. But then he turns to me and says, like, "Uncle, this will be a playground for you.
Yeah.
This is the perfect place for you to figure out what you want to work on." And then after that, I interview with a professor who ends up being exactly like he described.
Yeah, right.
Who understood that, who understood that my creativity and curiosity don't have to be limited to a field. That I can express it in different ways within physics, and was willing to help kindle that. And so just forming that understanding is what convinced me to come here. Nothing else.
Right.
I didn't even think about, well, what are you going to do in a hot, humid island when you're originally designed for cold, dry mountain climates? It's like, doesn't matter. I'm working with this professor, and that's going to be the thing. In Indian culture, we have this concept of a guru. So now this term has been kind of like misconstrued in Western culture, like, oh, guru is like an expert or something. But the real meaning of guru is more intimate than that. When you find yourself a guru, it's not just a teacher. It's a teacher that you are committing yourself to learning from, no matter what they teach.
Okay.
Because you believe that the kind of person they are is what you aspire to be.
Right.
And you want to learn everything you can from them. And so this was like the closest I've ever found to someone like that in academia.
Right. Someone that you can sort of fully trust and.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and in return, he trusted me. So when it came time to do my thesis project, he let me do whatever I wanted, within reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
Originally, I had some ideas where he should have said, "We can't build a particle accelerator here. I'm sorry. We don't have the manpower. I wish we could, but we don't."
Yeah, yeah.
But otherwise, he let me have full control of my thesis project. And where else would I have a chance to do that?
Yeah, not many places.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned OIST, which is where we are.
Mm-hmm.
You've been at OIST a while now, and it's grown while you've been here,
Mm-hmm.
and you've also you've contributed to that growth, and you're now sort of having some sort of, shall we say, influence in its growth more directly in your role as kind of like a student representative, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the challenges with being involved in a new institution like OIST, and also what are the pros and cons? Because it seems like there are, at least from my being here only 6 months now, there are pros and there are cons.
Well, I guess one of the biggest pros is that because it's young, it's flexible.
Yeah.
Like a sapling. So you can push and mold things in directions that you normally wouldn't be able to at other universities. Most other places, I mean, my two other higher education universities were the University of Berkeley and the University of Cambridge.
Right.
Both of which have been around for a while.
Yeah.
So pushing any radical change is probably not going to happen. But here at OIST, now that we're bringing people from all over the world, we have a chance to try to do something better from the ground up, as opposed to just applying principles from the top down.
Yeah.
So that's a huge plus. The downside is because we're bringing people from all over the world, the ideas about how the university should be run differ based on the person.
Right.
And so it's a culture clash unlike any other, because it's not just difference in personal culture, it's difference in intellectual culture.
Yeah.
It's difference in mentorship styles. It's difference in thoughts on research output. And somehow we have to find a middle ground.
Yeah.
Which slows things down a bit, but it also makes it really interesting.
Right. Do you think that we've gravitated towards any particular cultures? Like, I mean, for one thing, English is the language we speak at the university.
I think definitely because our first two presidents were trained in the American system, we have a very strong influence from the North American style of university. But I think also we have sort of like a negative influence, or not negative, but like a repulsion from the Japanese system.
Right.
There are some things about the Japanese education system that we are actively trying to avoid.
Right.
They inevitably can happen, but we're still trying to avoid those mistakes and try to do it better. That doesn't mean that we're going to emulate the North American model, but it's also like an influence in a different way.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just, a transplanted American thing in Japan.
Oh no, definitely not.
It has its own quirks,
Yeah.
which are born out of the culture. But I mean, can you talk a little bit about, if you want, your role on the student council?
Right. So I've been a part of the student council for, 2.5 years now. So starting in the beginning of my second year, I was in the student council almost continuously until now. There was a short break in between when I changed roles. But for most of that time, I was the student representative to the faculty assembly, which basically means I get to sit in a room while the faculty squabble about the nature of the university and direction it's going. This is where this culture clash happens, and keep my mouth shut.
Right. Yeah.
I never spoke a single word like publicly in that session, but I learned an awful lot.
Yeah.
And I try to do the best I could to use what I learned to push student agendas through other means outside of that assembly.
Right.
Over that time as well, the student council changed from simply being a group that organizes student activities to a group that is actively engaging with the executives on a monthly basis. So when I started, we only had a meeting with the dean every so often, whenever we could pin him down.
Right.
Now, in my current role as chair of the student council, we have confirmed monthly meetings with the dean. We have regular meetings with the president, regular meetings with the head of facilities, and any other executives that we need to discuss student affairs with. We go and talk to them, and they take us seriously.
Yeah. I mean, you're literally representing the students and the student body in that role, right?
Yeah.
But that can be challenging, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I should provide some context. Before this, I would not touch student government with a 10-foot pole. I always thought that it just wasn't something that I would be interested in.
Yeah.
But when I was elected to be the representative, I was nominated despite saying anything, and I was elected despite saying anything. So clearly there was some mandate from the students at the time that they thought I would do a good job.
Right.
And since then, I've still been elected into a position, which at least gives me the belief that there are some students out there that still believe I should do a good job for their sake. Yeah. And it's for their sake that I do this.
Yeah.
A lot of the issues that come up, most of the issues actually, are things that do not affect me. My own research is mostly unaffected by everything I've done in student council. But there are other students who are affected by it, and they're also very busy in their work. Yeah. I manage to have time, or I try to create time to deal with it so I can help them. Yeah. And that's sort of my belief behind it. As long as I know that I could be helping some students with the work that I'm doing, I will continue to do it.
And you're not just helping the current students, right? You're also helping future potential students in similar circumstances and building that system.
Yeah. And that's something that can't happen alone. It's definitely not been a one-person job.
No, not at all.
The council, each council that I've worked with has been instrumental in designing how we steer the student body moving forward and how we approach a self-sufficient student body like we see at other universities.
Yeah. I'm kind of interested because you mentioned that you wouldn't have touched student politics. I think you said was the phrase you used. With a 10-foot pole. I remember at my undergrad, at least in Australia, the major universities have a really vicious political system, and it's actually. I sort of am curious. I was involved in. I guess you could call it. Something like student politics, but on a graduate level, and I found that to be much less like political and vicious. Right? It's more just like we're just trying to represent students and their interests and do maybe some events.
Well, I think at least with my university, part of it was the undergraduate student body. Their main job was allocating money, which would explain why people are vicious because they want more funds for their club.
Right.
But graduate level, I feel like there are still some more policy-based things because most of the time the graduates are being paid by the university as opposed to the other way around. So there are some contractual obligations that can be negotiated there before.
Yeah. It's some. I think graduate students are already they are more mature just physically and mentally because they've been through the undergraduate experience already. But I'm sort of curious, it'd be interesting to know what percentage of people who involve themselves in sort of graduate student politics, if you can call it that, actually dislike or had any part in undergraduate. Because my indication is that perhaps very few liked the undergraduate student politics.
Yeah. Out of the people that I worked with in student council, I only know of one person who at least has shown that they've worked with undergraduate student government affairs. And it was that experience that actually helped inform the direction in how we would build this student council. Their constitution or terms of reference was largely the framework we used to write our own, but obviously with some OIS-based changes.
Right. We've got some comments on Twitch. We're live on Twitch, by the way. And this podcast will be recorded and then uploaded separately.
Right.
I'm actually just going to check. It seems like we may have some technical issue with the camera. Let me double check.
Hey, I heard the shutter. Did the shutter turn off?
Maybe, yeah. Okay, let's reboot this EOS. Apologies for this short technical interruption. Okay, we've got the camera back.
So could people hear us the whole time?
They could hear us the whole time. They had a frozen image for about 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that, people.
That was the comment?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm not going to read this out verbatim because some of it is rude, but maybe it's just trolling. I would be surprised we are on Twitch. Okay, and someone is asking about what is E equals mc squared. Okay, the most generic science equation out there. So, by the way, do you watch Twitch much? What's your experience with?
I actually do. I got into watching Twitch as a kind of a bad habit. The nature of my research and my master's required me to distract myself for 10 to 15 minutes at a time while my simulations were running.
Gotcha.
So I learned to go on Twitch and watch StarCraft 2 games while I was waiting. But nowadays, I mostly use it to watch one channel in particular, Geek and Sundry.
Okay.
So there seems to be just about something every single day that I watch. Like there's one show about comics, there's one show about just general video game stuff, and then twice a week there's shows that revolve around a D&D game called Critical Role.
Oh, okay.
So like one on Fridays for us, but Thursdays for North America. For 4 hours, these voice actors play a Dungeons and Dragons game. And then another day they have a talk show, kind of like an aftermath.
Sorry, I just realized the camera had paused again. Has it? It's fine now.
Okay.
Interesting. Maybe it's just frozen on my my thing. Apologies. Okay, so you were saying that you watch this
Critical Role. Yeah. And then another show is about basically like the mythology behind various the universe world building of various shows and media.
Okay. Cool.
But that's the main thing I watch now. And occasionally, like twice a year, there's speed running competitions that go on all week that I'll watch.
I have never watched those like live, but I've seen the cringe reels.
I mean, sure, the cringe reels are bad, but there's some really good stuff going on too.
I don't really understand it though. I mean, like I understand speedrunning, but what is it's like a conference where they all like.
It's a marathon.
Yeah. Okay.
So they get together for a week and they just have a continual stream of various speed runs that people donate their time to run to help build money for charity.
I see. Yeah. I understood it had something to do with charity.
Yeah. So they raise money for charity. They have if you donate money, you can influence the certain outcomes in the speed runs, or you can unlock like additional content in the speed run. So like a good example is some person will be running Legend of Zelda, and if you pay a certain if people together donate a certain amount to that incentive, then after the run he'll show some really cool glitches that happen in the game. Things like that.
Interesting. Are you a big video gamer?
Yeah, I didn't really have a choice in the matter.
Oh, okay.
My aunt bought me me and my brother a Super Nintendo when I was 3.
Whoa, that's young actually.
Yes, I was exposed very early, and then later she complains that I play video games too much when it's directly her fault.
That is, yeah, that's totally her fault.
I would say that I sort of stopped a bit when I was in college because I got a bit busy, and also I wasn't really much of a PC gamer.
Ah, okay.
So I didn't really play much on my laptop.
Right.
But once I came here and I built my own computer, then I could start playing games again.
Yeah.
And then I bought a Switch, and it just got worse. Just this week, I bought Hyrule Warriors came in, and let's not talk about how much I've played that yet.
Okay, sure.
But yes.
This is something on a Switch, like Game Boy thing.
The Switch is, it's a bit of both, actually. In the Switch is Nintendo's new console, but you can also pull it out of a dock and then play it in portable mode.
Oh, so you can switch between console and Game Boy, right?
Yes.
Is it called a Game Boy still or not?
No, the Game Boy died out about a decade ago.
Okay. It shows you how much.
So they had the Game Boy Advance, and then the next generation was called the DS. And that's what they're called now. DS short for dual screen. So they had the DS, the 3DS, and that's where they are right now.
It's 3D? Like holographic? Or that's just the name, 3DS?
No. It's actually like the 3DS's its main claim to fame was that it could render things in stereographic 3D in the screen. Wow. You can toggle it on and off, like with a slider. So not toggle, but transition. Some people it gives headaches. Other people it's kind of cool. But that was its main thing.
Interesting. What's the physics behind that? How's that work? Do you know?
For the 3DS in particular, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
One of the more common ways for a single screen like that would be you alternate the images.
Like one frame is
You
this
you
perspective.
yeah you alternate the images for the parallax.
Oh.
So like the frame from left eye versus frame for right eye.
Yes. Yeah.
And as the slider is basically drawing those apart. So if you're in 2D mode, they're the same, and in 3D mode, you slowly alternate those.
Right, and that will be, depending on how far away you are from the screen, how far away how far apart your eyes are.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, interesting. So, can you explain a little bit about your research project that you're doing in physics? Keeping in mind that I have at best, middle, senior, high school competence in physics.
All right. So I'll focus more on what we're studying as opposed to how.
Okay.
Because the how is still something I'm trying to figure out.
Oh, really?
But what we're looking at is we're looking for things that behave like magnetic monopoles.
Okay.
Now I'll step back from that, but just keep that in mind.
Okay.
Magnetic monopole.
Magnetic monopole.
So growing up, we learned that magnets always have a north and south pole.
Yeah.
Right. And if you chop a magnet in half, it's got a north and south pole again, and it's infinitely divisible like this.
Yeah. And they stick together.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the same poles don't. Right. They repel.
Right.
So this is what we call a dipole in electromagnetism, because electric systems can also behave like this too. You can have electric dipoles.
Oh.
So not a north and a south, but a plus and a minus.
Oh, yeah.
Same sort of idea.
Gotcha.
Right? The point, like the union of electromagnetism, is that the physics of north and south poles and plus and minus charges is mathematically the same, or mathematically similar. I shouldn't say the same because my supervisor tells me equal signs are important. So
Okay.
they're mathematically similar.
So there's just to clarify, so there's kind of there's an A part and there's a B part, and the A part and the B part connect.
Yes.
Mathematically, and in the same kind of sense, roughly, in both in electrical circuits and also magnets, traditional.
Yeah, in electricity and in magnetism.
Yeah.
Now, in electricity, we know that plus and minus charges can be separated, right? But in magnetism, we haven't seen being able to separate north and south poles.
Because when you chop it in half,
You get two more, another dipole. But mathematically, if they are still similar, then there should be a monopole as opposed to a dipole, whether it's just a north pole or just a south pole. Now, to this day, we still have not seen this experimentally. No one has. However, in certain magnetic systems, we can see behavior that acts like monopoles. They act like confined charges of magnetism that can move freely in the system. So they're not arbitrary constructions, but they move freely in the system like any particle would, and they interact with each other in the same way that electric charges would.
And when you're saying they, are you meaning kind of like a region of the space, or are you how are you identifying this is where there's some kind of behavior which is like a monopole?
So we usually identify this by the nature of the fact that it's made up of a bunch of little dipoles. And the little dipoles are all pointing in various directions. But in some cases, some dipoles will all point toward a center, or they'll all point away from a center.
Yeah.
And if they do this, then that area looks like a region of localized magnetic charge. So we call these little dipoles spins because they're represented as the magnetic spins of ions in a crystalline lattice. Now, I won't go into spin because no one really understands spin, and that's a really tricky topic.
Gotcha.
But think of them as tiny magnets.
Yeah.
And so we have these magnets confined onto a lattice. And based on the directions they're pointing, we can see these regions of localized magnetic charge. And this is what we call magnetic monopoles within this particular system, which is called spin ice.
Right. So even though you're not physically reducing it to some particle or something, you're saying there's kind of this monopole behavior here, based on the direction of the bipolar polar magnets. Interesting. Okay. So what what have you found, or what is that the end of the story, or was?
Well, so that is the object of interest.
Yeah.
And so my thesis is looking at ways that we can try to directly view these monopoles. So there's plenty of experimental evidence that these monopoles exist, but most of the evidence is indirect. It's not a direct image of the monopole or how it moves into space.
Right.
It's more just evidence of these monopoles must exist because there's nothing else to explain this signal. Which is like a simple inference argument, and it's still strong evidence, but it's not the same as being able to directly see them interact with each other.
And maybe manipulate them if that was a benefit.
Eventually, yes. This topic falls under the category of frustrated magnetism, and this is one reason why people study frustrated magnetism, because we're dealing with these individual spins, these tiny magnets in the crystal. And the end goal for some people is to be able to manipulate these spins to create what people call spintronics.
Yeah, right.
So as opposed to electronics, which uses the movement of electrons to flow circuits, spintronics uses the orientation of spins in a magnetic lattice to create circuits.
Right.
And the main advantage is that energetically, it's a lot easier to flip a spin than it is to move an electron.
Right.
So power consumption goes down tremendously if these systems work.
Right.
But the problem is getting them to work.
Yeah. Okay. And you're sort of part of the big scientific machine that might help that
In a way.
become possible.
Yeah.
Is that your focus though? Spin
No.
tronics at all?
My focus is the monopoles, which are not applicable in any really way. It's a really interesting problem.
Yeah.
From a physics point of view, because it's a problem that's been plaguing us for almost a century.
Wow.
And if we can see these directly, we can continue to study these analogs of monopoles to get a better sense of what real monopoles would behave like. And even though an analog is not the real thing, it still gives you a better intuition for how the system will work, which helps you design better experiments and increases your chances of finding it.
You mentioned that your supervisor might not see a direct or strict equivalence between, say, if I got what you were saying correctly, there's not necessarily a strict equivalence between electrical sort of.
What I mean by that is not strict equivalence means the laws of magnetism are not equal to the laws of electricity.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Using that word equals is very important in his eyes.
I see.
Because they're not equal. There's a few constants difference in the formulation of the two. So they are not equal to each other because they're not exactly equal.
Right.
But they are similar.
Yeah. My question is because, I mean, from a neuroscience background, I have more intuitive understanding of kind of charges associated with particles moving, across membranes in a neuron. And in that case, it's very clear, well, that particle has this charge and it's moving over here. But is it, because you haven't, or it seems like it's not currently possible to nail down particular particles that are sort of monopoles in a magnetism framework. I mean, does that suggest at all that it's maybe just not possible to have it like concentrated in one particle? Or, I mean, the fact you see these monopole kind of effects in the crystal lattice structure suggests that there's some behavior that exists, but is it possible that it's not necessarily reducible to the same degree as electrical charge?
I mean, it certainly is possible. It just feels off.
Right.
That's all. Physics theory is built a lot around not just mathematics but symmetry. And I wish I could go into more, but honestly, this is a conversation you need with a theorist, not me.
I see.
But physics is built a lot around symmetry and the breaking of said symmetry, which leads to a lot of the physics that we understand now. And electromagnetism is one of the purest forms of that symmetry. So there's a very strong case for why there should be a monopole. There is no evidence that they don't exist.
Right.
There's just a lot of null evidence for their existence.
Right.
But
the fact that you see these monopole kind of effects that says that they should exist.
it implies they might be around. We just haven't found a way to see them.
Right.
And size is not really a concern. It's a matter of there are other properties you can take advantage of.
Okay.
For example, one of the best examples is the neutrino. So when the neutrino was first discovered, it was not discovered by direct detection, because neutrinos are incredibly small, and even now detecting them directly requires a large amount of material. But we found them because there was something missing. We found when a muon decayed. A muon is basically the big brother to an electron.
Okay.
Same charge, but 137 times more massive.
Whoa, okay.
So just like a really big electron, basically.
Right.
So
I mean, electrons are tiny, right?
relatively speaking, yes.
Yeah, okay.
So when the muon decays, it decays into a... Oh, shoot. I should know this. An electron and a... No. Okay.
It's okay. It's not a test, right? You were saying earlier that you're not so good at testing. This isn't a test.
Yeah, but I should know how. Okay. Anyways, when these particles decayed, they decayed into two particles, or a particle that split off, and another one where there was nothing. So you can see tracks of particles before they decay through something called a bubble chamber or smoke chamber. So you would see a track, particles coming. Then there's a vertex, and in the vertex, you would see one particle go this way, and then nothing.
What? So what's the vertex? Sorry.
Like the point where the particle decays.
Oh, okay.
So you would see it. You would see the particle just like suddenly just make a right turn for Albuquerque and go that way.
I see.
But that can't happen. That violates conservation of momentum.
Yeah.
It hasn't interacted with anything. Something else has to happen.
Right.
Something else has to conserve that momentum.
Yeah.
And that comes in the form of a neutrino.
Ah.
So we found it because we knew something has to be there.
Right.
And by measuring the mass and the energy of whatever else came out, we knew exactly how much energy was missing. This person asked about E equals mc squared.
Yeah.
It comes to this.
Okay. All right. So
By knowing the mass energy equivalence from this point, we know that there's something missing.
Right.
And based on that energy missing, we know that there's a particle missing. And we can say exactly how much mass or energy it should have.
Right.
And that's how the neutrino was found.
And so, by extension, you could use this kind of this logic or this reasoning that if you see some effect on something, and you can't observe, like there's something missing in the explanation of why this is happening, then you can try to deduce what that missing thing is and call it something.
Yeah, and so that's an indirect way of observing it, but it's still a way of observing it.
It is, yeah.
So that's still a way that people could find monopoles now.
I see. We have a question from Dead Penguin.
Oh dear.
As a scientific podcast, it would be nice to know a bit about your backgrounds and exact topic for this episode. I guess the exact topic for this episode has been wide-ranging so far, but your background is physics. And mine is neuroscience. So feel free to ask your questions, and I won't say the name, but the person who asked about MC squared, E equals MC squared, that is, you have some interesting comments about that now. Oh
dear. So are they probably a troll?
I think so, yeah. That's okay. I will just ignore them. But so what else could we talk about?
Well, what else do you want to know?
I would be interested in knowing actually. I mean, you're more of an experimental physicist, right? What do you say? Because I mean, actually. As you know, but as viewers won't know, I'm running or helping to organise a 3-minute thesis competition where people have to explain their thesis in 3 minutes. It's not an easy task, even for like even for some medical kind of applications kind of theses. But for more fundamental science, it seems like it could be even more difficult, some people would say. What's your opinion on that in terms of exciting others or explaining your research to others? I mean, it seemed like you had to go kind of to basics there with me.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a constant chore, and or do you think? Yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts generally about that?
I mean, people understand what they're most familiar with.
Yeah.
So if they aren't continuously exposed to fundamental science or not in that environment, you have to relate it to them somehow. And I bring up the sample of magnets because from a lot of people, that's all they learn about magnets. Mm-hmm. They learn that there's North Pole, South Pole, and the two ends don't go together.
Right.
So you have to find that common ground and build from there. Mm-hmm. With applications, the common ground can be built a lot earlier in terms of the application. Like, we're going to fix cancer. Well, most people are familiar with cancer, so we can start from there. Yeah. And some of them might be familiar with the process of cancer and where it comes from, because it's something that they may have to deal with in their lives as well. Yeah. So in that way, like, medicine is the science that we're exposed to most often. Right. Because it's the stuff that we have to deal with directly. Mm-hmm. The other sciences maybe not as directly, and so you need to find that common ground to start from. Yeah. Physics builds from first principles. You start somewhere that everyone can agree on and derive everything else. And at least for me, that's how I try to explain all of my science. Right. Start from the foundation we all share, and then derive everything from there. Maybe it takes a bit longer, but hopefully it leads to better understanding. Yeah. And I mean, because something that probably annoys all scientists at some point is seeing kind of like a bad explanation or like a lazy explanation of some kind of scientific principle. Like, and to be fair, some of my explanations about neutrinos are probably like that, and I feel really bad. No, but to some extent, you have to accept that without like going really into the details of the math or the theories in physics or in other fields, going really deep into the biology or something. Without going into all of those details, there are always going to be subtleties and nuances that you have to skip over. Yeah, it's a delicate process though, because it's good to skip over nuances if you need to get to the point, but you do not want to sacrifice the meaning of the conclusion. Right. Because if you make too many assumptions, then you start to form incorrect ideas about how things work. Yeah. Kind of like a false intuition that, if it generalized, will just be completely wrong. Yeah. So that's the tricky part when it comes to generalizing too far. Yeah. And that's probably something your 3-minute theses competitors will have to deal with. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's not an easy chore to do and to do well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, hopefully they all do well next week on Friday. I'm looking forward to those talks actually. Yeah. All right. Well, I don't have any specific extra questions. Okay. Did you have anything else that you wanted to chat about? Do we have any questions in the chat? No, Dead Penguin has not replied at all, so we haven't obviously probably you gave a very good explanation of your research, and then he wasn't interested in neuroscience. That's okay. Or she. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. Well, we can have a bit of the meta conversation. What do you think about this whole idea? I mean, it seems a bit odd having this in your living room, but yeah, I suppose it's the best that any of us can do right now. Yeah, for now it's the best. And also, yeah, it's not as, like, I've been listening the whole time, and there's still that kind of, don't know what it is, but there's just like a background. I mean, just the engineer in me is just saying, like, you're gonna have a whole bunch of noise from all these cables running around conductors. Yeah, that's true. You need to think about maybe braiding them together or looking for other sources of electrical interference. Yeah. There's probably something going on. The other thing is to try different microphones, different cables, different everything. I mean, it's still a good idea. I think the strongest thing is you need to have a good plan of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, this show, for example, I think it started off fairly strong, and then we sort of meandered a bit, which maybe that's what you want, right? But it's important to have that vision about what you want this to end up being.
Yeah. And I mean, to be fair, today was a slight experiment, at least at the beginning, but I'm glad that you think it went well. The biographical kind of portion.
I would hope so.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because it's an interesting dynamic because it's kind of, to an extent, it's a collaboration with the interviewee, and then to an extent, it's also like I'm kind of in charge, in a sense.
I mean, you are ultimately the director of this enterprise.
Yeah. I can say, answer this question.
I'm just number one.
Right. That's true. Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming, and thank you for being on the third episode of the Significantly Scientific podcast. Do you have any name suggestions if we're going to change the name?
There's anything that doesn't make you roll your tongue.
Yeah, they accidentally say it the other way. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Do you want to do any shout outs or plugs? Because that's a thing now that I just decided.
I see. Well, you should, if you're interested in computer science or algorithms and programming, you should watch Leos OS.
That's true, actually.
He is...
How do we spell that again? Leos.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
So he is another student at OIST who has been running a stream for the last 4 years quite well, actually. And pretty much every day he's been streaming about computer science and tackling interesting problems with algorithms, and then documenting that in the algorithm archive.
Okay. We have more people talking again. Do we have a general schedule? It's far easier to give questions. I can think about the question, but okay, that's a good suggestion. I come from archaeology and IT. Can't really come with any decent questions on physics right away. Okay.
Hey, I love archaeology too.
Yeah, me too. Actually, my step-grandfather, who gave me this is Tor, I think, the Egyptian god of writing. He was really into Egyptian mythology and like all the archaeology of all that. He was actually a kind of a religious spiritualist. He believed he was like descended from like some Egyptians. It was kind of weird, but
interesting.
That's actually maybe I'm not sure if that's the
Thoth. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Thank you, Dead Penguin. I feel uncomfortable actually thanking a dead penguin, but yeah, okay. Was there any questions though? It seems like we both tuned in. Okay. Alright, well if you guys have any questions, we can go into like overtime, I guess. But officially the stream, the podcast part is over, but if anyone has questions, we can stay for another minute or so. If no one asks any questions, I guess that's the...
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, archaeology. What do you think about Jet Li playing as the mummy? Lol. I have no idea.
Oh gosh. Okay. No, because so the mummy. There are three. Like the Brendan Fraser mummy movies. The third one.
What is that?
Okay. Oh boy. So The Mummy was originally a film that came out beginning of maybe 30s or 40s.
Oh.
Like the classic horror mummy that we're familiar with.
Yeah.
Right. So then they did a reimagining of this in the late 90s, early 2000s with Brendan Fraser.
Okay.
And that was more of like a campy adventure, Indiana Jones style. And the first two were okay. Like they weren't great, but they're fun, campy films. The third one took place in China. And so instead of having an Egyptian mummy, you had Jet Li as the mummy.
Oh. This is a recent film now?
No, it was still about maybe 7-8 years ago.
I see.
I thought it was interesting in like what they chose to do and like looking at mummies from a different culture. However, I feel like Jet Li was kind of wasted on it.
Oh, right.
Like, at the time, I can understand because Jet Li was being put into a lot of films where they just wanted somebody who could do wushu, but not really acting very strongly. Not to say that Jet Li isn't a strong actor. He can be when he needs to be. Like some of his like a lot of his wushu films, even though like they're in a genre about martial arts, they're some of his best films. My favorite from like two of my favorites from him are Hero and Fearless, which have like very like interesting stories, but are also feature wushu. And in the case of The Mummy, it just didn't really make sense to have him there because there wasn't a need to have that.
Was he like dressed up in the mummy like?
No. He was like they had like the idea with the mummies came from the Great Wall, the terracotta soldiers and like that sort of design.
Okay.
Yeah, so like it was interesting to see what they were trying to pull, but it didn't feel accurate archaeologically speaking. We froze again?
Yeah. Apologies. It's why does it do that? I just guess I have to restart the EOS thing. It's a shame. I bought this power adapter thing so that it wouldn't do that, but now there's some other reason why it stops. But we'll fix it.
Could be a buffer problem.
Or in this case, I think the camera may have just turned itself off. The
Ah,
other thing is overheating.
yeah, that's true. Well, you did turn the AC off.
I did, yeah. I might actually turn that back on.
I am also overheating.
Yeah, I'll turn it back on because actually, yeah, the camera did turn on. Because seeing as it actually makes no difference to this background hiss or whatever. Alright, this will slowly come back to life. Will this stay?
You need to take some liquid cooling from your PC and put it onto your camera.
Actually, it's not liquid cooled, my PC.
Really?
It's just got massive fans. Which is also why I turned it off, because it might be a bit too loud. Apologies, stream people, you're currently in the dark. Just actually might not that much.
Any more questions?
No, they're talking about, it's Twitch chat. Yeah, I think, oh yeah, that's hot.
So your battery adapter overheats.
Yeah, which makes sense. But yeah, I think, let's see. Okay, that's going on. Let's see. Alrighty, well, we're going to find out how long this lasts for. But we don't have many more questions. Guys, if you have any more questions, feel free to ask them, but otherwise we'll probably be ending this soon because we've been going for almost an hour and a half.
Goodness.
Yeah, it's 7 to 9.
Okay.
Do you have any questions for the chatters?
I don't even know. I can't even see what they're saying, so.
That's true. Oh, you're out of focus.
The mysterious chat.
Yeah. Oh, maybe this. Let's see. Dr. Archaeology is going to make a fossil and keep freezing. Okay. Whatever. Not sure what that means. Well, there's no more questions really.
Well, it's your stream, so you make the call.
Yeah, I think that might be it, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. Thanks for joining again, and thanks for people who were tuning in. Oh, yeah.
One last question.
It's always the way. Here's a question: do you think the premises of Prometheus could ever happen? Prometheus.
Oh, the movie.
Alien movie, I think.
So, if by premises you mean that life could have been seeded by an alien species, I mean, sure. There's always a possibility.
I think it's actually more probable than not. Maybe not in the like massive, like complicated sense of like individual life forms.
Yeah.
I can't actually remember the total premise, but maybe I don't know. Was the premise that like humans kind of were sent here as
It was like that life was seeded in such a way as to build up to specifically human form.
Yeah, that's bullshit. But
Yeah, I find that to be highly improbable.
yeah.
Whether it was seeded by, like, in general to start forming on Earth, that's possible, but unless we met said species, there wouldn't be really a way to know.
I mean, there is a serious theory, though, that we are Martians. That actually, it makes no sense why there are some, small, very small, single-cell organisms and the like, which can withstand, ridiculous amounts of radiation and extreme temperatures that don't even exist on Earth. It doesn't make sense that they should have those, have been built in such a way to survive those sort of conditions. And therefore, it's possible that they actually arrived here, from some meteorite.
But on the flip side, we don't know what life is going to have to deal with in the future. So maybe such traits need to be developed in the gene pool for something else.
Yeah, but I mean, some of these organisms just repeatedly have these traits. It's not just like, one-offs, it's like whole...
Without the external pressures to select for them.
Yeah, that's the point. And so
I guess that's the key difference.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's very expensive to like just randomly go down this path of, becoming super good at surviving extreme radiation that you would get in, say, Mars or outer space. So actually, there's a fairly serious theory that actually maybe life started on Mars and then somehow got transferred here through like a meteorite or something. I'm not a space guy.
Well, there were a lot of comets that supposedly hit the Earth when it was forming, and that's how a lot of the oceans form.
Right. Okay.
So that is also a possibility.
Yeah. I think, I mean, how life initially started, that's a massive question, but whether or not life was seeded here, I think, I think it's more likely than not, personally. But in the Prometheus sense, I think we agree not.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think there's no more questions. And it being 9 o'clock, we said we wouldn't go longer than an hour and a half, so
Yeah.
we'll call it then. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in.